These differences in thinking create natural barriers to connection with those who haven't made similar shifts. The conversations become different. When others want to analyze their feelings, you want to analyze their options. When they want sympathy for their problems, you want solutions for their circumstances. When they want validation for their choices, you want to understand their objectives. You're not being cold, you're being useful, but useful isn't always what people want. Sometimes they want someone to share their confusion, to validate their victimhood, to enable their weakness. You have to decide, will you pretend to be weaker than you are to maintain connections with people who need you to be weak? Will you dumb down your insights to make others comfortable with their lack of insight? Will you perform emotional dependency to make others feel better about their actual dependency? These choices define whether your mental strength becomes a tool for your advancement or a burden you carry to make others feel better about themselves. The transformation begins with small acts of mental rebellion. Stop asking permission for your thoughts. Stop explaining your decisions to people who didn't ask. Start making choices based on outcomes rather than how those choices make you feel in the moment. Practice holding your position when others try to sway you through emotion. Develop the ability to say no without justification, to disagree without apology, to proceed without consensus. Each of these moments builds the mental muscle that others will begin to notice and fear. These small rebellions feel enormous at first because you've been conditioned to seek approval for everything. The first time you express an opinion without immediately checking to see if others agree, it feels reckless. The first time you make a decision without explaining your reasoning, it feels selfish. The first time you maintain your position despite emotional pressure, it feels cruel. But these feelings are just withdrawal symptoms from your addiction to external validation. Start with low-stakes situations. Practice thinking your own thoughts about movies, restaurants, current events without immediately sharing them or seeking confirmation. Practice making small decisions, what to eat, what to wear, how to spend your evening without consulting others or considering their preferences. Practice disagreeing with minor points in conversation without apologizing for your perspective or trying to make others feel better about the disagreement. As you build this mental muscle, you'll notice something interesting. The world doesn't end. People don't abandon you for having your own thoughts. In fact, many people respect you more when you stop seeking their approval. They start taking your opinions more seriously when you stop diluting them for palatability. They start valuing your presence more when you stop being available for everything. But some people will resist your mental independence, especially those who benefited from your previous weakness. They'll try to guilt you back into seeking their approval, manipulate you back into explaining yourself, pressure you back into accommodating their preferences over your own. These are the people who need you to be weak so they can feel strong, who need you to be confused so they can feel wise, who need you to be dependent so they can feel valuable. Your job isn't to make this transition comfortable for them. Your job is to complete your own evolution from mental dependency to mental sovereignty. Some relationships will survive this transformation and become stronger. Others will reveal themselves to have been based on your weakness rather than your worth. You will know you have succeeded when people begin to treat you differently, with more respect, more caution, more genuine consideration. They will stop trying to manipulate you through guilt or emotional pressure because they sense those tactics no longer work. They will seek your opinion more and challenge it less. They will give you space to think, room to decide, time to respond. This isn't because you've become intimidating. It's because you've become sovereign. You've forged a mind so strong, so independent, so authentically yours that it demands respect simply by existing. The final marker of mental strength isn't that you no longer feel fear, doubt, or uncertainty. It's that these feelings no longer control your decisions. You can feel uncertain and still choose. You can feel afraid and still act. You can feel doubtful and still proceed. Your emotions become information rather than instructions, feedback rather than commands. People sense this shift even when they can't articulate it. They notice that you no longer collapse under pressure, that you no longer change your position based on their emotional state, that you no longer need their permission to be yourself. This creates a natural authority that has nothing to do with position or title and everything to do with inner stability. When you reach this level of mental sovereignty, something remarkable happens. You stop needing to prove your strength to anyone, including yourself. You know what you're capable of because you've developed those capabilities. You know what you will and won't tolerate because you've established and maintained those boundaries. You know what you want because you've stopped filtering your desires through other people's expectations. This is the mind that unnerves people, not because it's hostile or aggressive, but because it's free. Free from the need for approval, free from the fear of judgment, free from the compulsion to explain itself. It thinks its own thoughts, makes its own decisions, and answers to its own authority. In a world full of minds that require constant external input to function, mental sovereignty stands out like a lighthouse in a storm, steady, self-contained, and impossible to ignore. You sit in meetings, conversations, moments of conflict, and you feel it, that gnawing sense that everyone else operates from a script you were never given. They speak with certainty that unnerves you, make decisions without the paralysis of overthinking, command attention without begging for it. You've been taught that your sensitivity is a gift, that your consideration makes you noble, but deep down you know the truth. Your mind has become a prison of endless second-guessing, and others can smell that uncertainty like blood in water. Watch how they move through the world. Notice how they never seem to question whether their words will offend, whether their decisions will disappoint, whether their presence is too much or not enough. They inhabit their thoughts like armor, while you wear yours like an open wound. The difference isn't intelligence, you might outthink them all. The difference isn't even wisdom, you see complexities they ignore. The difference is something far more fundamental, something that cuts to the core of why you exhaust yourself thinking while they simply act. They have learned to think with their own mind. You have learned to think with everyone else's. Every thought you have passes through a filter of imagined judgment, anticipated criticism, potential disappointment. You don't just think a thought, you think about thinking it, then think about how others might react to you thinking it. By the time you speak, the moment has passed, the opportunity has closed, and someone with a simpler, stronger mind has claimed the space you should have occupied. This is your recognition moment. The moment when you stop pretending that your mental paralysis is sophistication, that your inability to act is actually deeper consideration. The moment when you acknowledge that all your complexity, all your nuance, all your careful analysis has made you weaker, not stronger, has made you less effective, not more thoughtful, has made you someone who watches life happen rather than someone who makes it happen. Society sold you the most dangerous myth of all, that goodness is enough, that being right matters more than being effective, that your intentions will somehow shield you from a world that rewards results over righteousness. You've been conditioned to seek approval, to soften your edges, to apologize for taking up space. But every day you watch as those with harder minds, clearer purposes, and less concern for universal love rise above you effortlessly. The lie isn't just that kindness wins, it's that you were ever meant to be this weak dot. Look around you. The people who control your salary, your opportunities, your future, do they spend their nights wondering if they're being too harsh? Do they lose sleep over whether their decisions might hurt someone's feelings? Do they second-guess their instincts because someone might disagree? They don't, and that's precisely why they have the power to control your life while you have the sensitivity to suffer under their control. You've been taught to see this as a moral failing on their part, haven't you? They're cold, they're heartless, they lack empathy. But what if the real truth is simpler and more uncomfortable? What if they simply understand something about survival? That you've been programmed to forget? What if your kindness isn't actually kindness at all, but fear dressed up as virtue? Fear of conflict, fear of disapproval, fear of standing alone in your convictions. The world told you that caring about everyone's feelings would make you noble. Instead, it made you irrelevant. It told you that considering every perspective would make you wise. Instead, it made you paralyzed. It told you that putting others first would make you valuable. Instead, it made you dispensable. Because here's what they never told you. A world that trains you to ignore your own needs is a world that needs someone to exploit. You've been living as if the game has rules, as if fairness exists, as if good intentions create good outcomes. But every day the evidence mounts against you. The promotion goes to someone less qualified, but more assertive. The relationship you invested everything in ends when they find someone who doesn't need them as much as you did. The respect you thought you earned evaporates the moment you show any vulnerability. You keep believing the lie because admitting the truth means admitting you've been participating in your own diminishment. Niccolo Machiavelli understood what your comfortable delusions have hidden from you. Strength of mind isn't about intelligence, it's about the capacity to think independently of others' emotional reactions to your thoughts. When you forge a mind so strong it unnerves people, you're not becoming cruel, you're becoming sovereign. You're developing the ability to hold uncomfortable truths, make necessary decisions, and pursue your objectives without requiring permission from a world that would rather keep you confused and dependent. This isn't about manipulation. This is about liberation from the need to be liked. Machiavelli wrote The Prince not as a manual for tyranny, but as an acknowledgement of reality. He observed that the world operates according to certain immutable laws, regardless of what we wish those laws to be. Power flows to those who understand these laws, not to those who pretend they don't exist. Influence gravitates toward those who can think clearly under pressure, not toward those who collapse into emotional chaos when challenged. Respect is given to those whose minds cannot be easily moved, not to those who bend with every wind of opinion. When he spoke of fear being more reliable than love, he wasn't advocating for cruelty. He was acknowledging that human nature responds more consistently to strength than to weakness. People may claim to love your kindness, but they rely on others' competence. They may praise your empathy, but they follow others' certainty. They may appreciate your consideration, but they respect others' boundaries. The mind that unnerves people isn't necessarily the smartest mind in the room. It's the most autonomous mind in the room. It's the mind that doesn't require external validation to function. That doesn't need consensus to proceed. That doesn't seek approval to exist. It thinks its own thoughts, reaches its own conclusions, and acts on its own authority. This terrifies most people because it reminds them of how dependent they've become on others' opinions, how much of their identity exists only in relation to what others think of them. You've been operating from a position of mental democracy where everyone gets a vote on your thoughts except you. Your mother's disapproval, your father's expectations, your friends' judgments, your colleagues' opinions, society's standards, they all have standing committees in your head, debating every decision you try to make. No wonder you feel exhausted. No wonder you feel uncertain. You're not thinking, you're mediating. Look at how your thoughts form, always checking, always seeking validation, always wondering if you're being too much or not enough. You think in committees with imaginary voices of parents, friends, society whispering corrections before you've even finished a thought. Your mind has become a democracy where everyone gets a vote except you. This is why you hesitate when others act, why you question when others proceed, why you seek consensus when others simply decide. Mental weakness isn't lack of intelligence, it's the inability to think without an audience. Every opinion you hold has been focus grouped in your head. Every decision you make has been pre-approved by an internal board of people who aren't even present, most of whom don't have your best interests at heart. You've become so accustomed to this mental crowdsourcing that you've forgotten what your own unfiltered thoughts even sound like. When was the last time you had an opinion that you didn't immediately wonder if it was acceptable? When was the last time you wanted something without questioning whether you deserved it? This is why you freeze in moments when others act. They're operating from a central command, their own will, their own assessment, their own authority. You're operating from a committee that can never reach consensus because its members have conflicting interests. They want you to be successful but not too successful, confident but not arrogant, strong but not threatening, independent but still available when they need you. The truly successful people you observe aren't necessarily smarter than you. They haven't necessarily had better opportunities or easier lives. What they have is something you've trained yourself out of, the ability to think their own thoughts and act on their own authority. They've developed what you've surrendered mental sovereignty. Watch how they respond to criticism. They listen, they evaluate, they decide what has merit and what doesn't. Then they proceed according to their own judgment. They don't spend days replaying conversations, wondering if they said something wrong, analyzing every facial expression for signs of disapproval. They certainly don't change their entire approach because someone expressed disagreement. True mental strength begins in solitude, in those moments when you stop performing your thoughts for others and start thinking for your own survival and advancement. Machiavelli wrote from exile, away from the courts where he had to please and perform. In that isolation, he developed insights that still unnerve people 5 centuries later. In that solitude, his mind was finally free to observe reality without the pressure to make those observations palatable to others. You must create your own exile, not physical, but mental. Spaces where your thoughts can grow dangerous, where your conclusions can become uncomfortable, where your mind can develop the muscle memory of independence. This mental isolation isn't about becoming antisocial or disconnected from others. It's about creating sanctuary space where your thoughts belong entirely to you, where you can observe without commentary, analyze without approval seeking, conclude without consensus building. Most people never experience this kind of mental solitude because they're terrified of what they might discover about themselves, about others, about the world. In these spaces of mental isolation, uncomfortable truths begin to surface. You start to notice patterns you've been trained not to see. You begin to understand motivations you've been taught to ignore. You develop the capacity to think thoughts that make you powerful rather than thoughts that make you popular. This is where mental strength is born, not in interaction with others, but in the courage to be alone with your own unfiltered perceptions. Here's what happens in that solitude. You stop editing your thoughts for palatability. You stop diluting your observations for politeness. You stop moderating your conclusions for social acceptability. You start thinking like a scientist studying human behavior, rather than like a participant seeking approval from the subjects of your study. This shift in perspective is what creates the unnerving quality others will eventually sense in you, the quality of someone who sees clearly because they're not invested in what they see being pleasant. The strongest minds learn to hold contradictions without the desperate need to resolve them immediately. You can love someone and recognize they're not good for you. You can value kindness while acknowledging that sometimes cruelty serves better. You can want peace while preparing for war. Weak minds collapse under these tensions, scrambling to choose sides, to be consistent, to be comfortable. Strong minds use these contradictions as fuel, understanding that complexity is power, that nuance is strength, that your ability to hold opposing truths makes you unpredictable and therefore formidable. Most people live in a world of false binaries because thinking in absolutes is easier than navigating complexity. You're either good or bad, right or wrong, with them or against them. But reality operates in spectrums, in paradoxes, in situations where multiple truths coexist. The person who can hold these contradictions without psychological discomfort has a massive advantage over those who must choose sides to maintain their mental equilibrium. Consider how this applies to relationships. Weak minds either idealize people or demonize them. Strong minds can simultaneously appreciate someone's value while recognizing their limitations, care about someone's well-being while protecting themselves from their dysfunction, respect someone's strengths while remaining immune to their manipulation tactics. This isn't duplicity, this is sophisticated thinking that recognizes humans as complex beings rather than simple categories. The same principle applies to your own self-perception. You've been taught to see yourself as either confident or insecure, strong or weak, successful or failing. But the reality is that you contain multitudes, contradictions, possibilities that don't fit into neat categories. The stronger your mind becomes, the more comfortable you become with these internal contradictions. The less you need to present a consistent image to the world. This comfort with paradox becomes a source of power because it makes you unpredictable. People cannot easily categorize you, cannot easily manipulate you, cannot easily anticipate your responses. They're accustomed to dealing with minds that operate in simple patterns, predictable reactions, consistent positions. A mind that can hold contradictions is a mind that can adapt to circumstances rather than being imprisoned by previous positions. Every interaction becomes different when you stop reacting and start responding. Reactive minds are slaves to stimuli. Someone criticizes, you defend. Someone praises, you glow. Someone attacks, you retaliate. But the strategic mind observes first, calculates second, and acts third. You begin to see patterns in people's behavior, to understand their needs and fears, to recognize when silence serves you better than speech, when absence creates more impact than presence. This isn't about becoming cold, it's about becoming calculated. The difference between reacting and responding is the difference between being controlled and being in control. Reactive behavior is predictable, and predictable people are easily manipulated. When someone knows exactly how you'll respond to specific stimuli, they can orchestrate your behavior like a puppet master pulling strings. But when your responses become strategic rather than automatic, when you choose your reactions based on desired outcomes rather than emotional impulses, you become dangerous to those who relied on your predictability. This shift from reactive to strategic thinking changes every dynamic in your life. In professional settings, you stop being the person who can be counted on to take on extra work because you can't say no. You become the person whose cooperation must be earned, whose time must be respected, whose boundaries cannot be casually violated. In personal relationships, you stop being the one who always compromises, always accommodates, always bends. You become someone whose needs matter, whose limits are real, whose presence is valuable because it's not guaranteed. Strategic thinking means you start asking different questions. Instead of, how can I make this person happy? You ask, what outcome am I trying to achieve here? Instead of, what's the nice thing to do? You ask, what's the effective thing to do? Instead of, how can I avoid conflict? You ask, what conflict is worth having? These questions lead to different choices, which lead to different outcomes, which lead to different levels of respect from others. People begin to treat you differently when they realize you're no longer operating from emotional reflexes. They become more careful with their words, more respectful of your time, more strategic in their own approach to you. This isn't because you've become mean, it's because you've become purposeful. When you develop true mental strength, others sense something different about you, a stillness that suggests depths they cannot fathom, a certainty that doesn't require their agreement. You stop explaining yourself, stop seeking understanding, stop trying to bring others along on your journey. This unnerves people because it forces them to confront their own mental dependency, their own need for validation, their own lack of inner authority. Your strength becomes a mirror that reflects their weakness, and most people find that reflection unbearable. There's a particular quality that emerges from genuine mental strength, a kind of calm that suggests untapped reserves, a quietness that implies controlled power. It's not the false confidence of someone trying to convince themselves they're strong. It's not the loud bravado of someone compensating for inner weakness. It's the settled certainty of someone who has nothing to prove because they know exactly who they are and what they're capable of. This quality unnerves people because it's so rare. Most people they encounter are either trying too hard to impress or trying too hard to disappear. Most people are either performing strength they don't possess or apologizing for strength they do possess. But genuine mental strength doesn't perform and doesn't apologize. It simply exists, like a mountain that doesn't need to justify its height or a river that doesn't need to explain its direction. When you stop explaining yourself, something interesting happens. People stop questioning you as much. When you stop seeking understanding, people start seeking to understand you. When you stop trying to bring others along on your journey, some people start wanting to follow. This is the paradox of strength. The less you need from others, the more they want to give you. But this strength also creates distance, and that distance makes others uncomfortable. They're accustomed to being able to influence you through emotional appeals, to change your mind through social pressure, to modify your behavior through approval or disapproval. When these tactics stop working, when your decisions remain unaffected by their emotional state, they begin to feel powerless in relation to you. This feeling of powerlessness manifests as discomfort, which they often interpret as you being different or changed or difficult. Here lies the price Machiavelli never explicitly stated. The stronger your mind becomes, the fewer people will be able to relate to how you think. You will find yourself in conversations where others are still seeking comfort while you're calculating outcomes. They're looking for reassurance while you're planning contingencies. This isn't arrogance, it's evolution. You're developing capabilities that most people never will, and that development naturally creates distance. The question becomes, are you willing to be lonely to be free? This loneliness isn't the loneliness of isolation, it's the loneliness of operating at a different level than those around you. It's like being the only adult in a room full of children, or the only person who can see clearly in a room full of people with blurred vision. You're not superior, you're just operating with different capabilities, different priorities, different frameworks for understanding reality. Most people think in terms of how things make them feel. You start thinking in terms of how things actually are. Most people make decisions based on immediate emotional payoffs. You start making decisions based on long-term strategic outcomes. Most people seek relationships that make them comfortable. You start seeking relationships that make you stronger.